to access that. And we can also send out a copy of the presentations that you're seeing this morning as well. So we would ask that everybody goes on mute. It just makes it much easier in terms of background noise. It makes it clear for everybody. We're not intending to have an open questions and answer session, but there is a chat box that people can insert their questions into, and Kathy is going to adjudicate on that and let us know as the questions come up. It would be useful in that regard if you can actually identify yourselves, so we understand the background to any questions you might be raising. If you have any technical issues this morning, Kathy will support you with those. So it's Kathy McGrath. No dot or anything, Kathy McGrath with a C at disability-federation.ie, and Kathy will help. She is able to send out the presentation if anybody loses the link and just wants to follow it on their own PC. So I just want to start the session this morning by thanking my co-presenters this morning, Dr. Meredith Raleigh, Mark O'Connor, and Mark, I think you're co-presenting with Margaret this morning. So thank you very much. It's our first time working together to pull a session together online like this. So hopefully it goes smoothly for us all, but thank you very much. So in terms of the presentation this morning, do you want to just skip forward, Kathy? Kathy, can we move the slide forward? Thanks. So, and everybody's on mute, that's great. So my name is Suzanne Maloney. I'm a National Disability Specialist in the HSE working on the strategy side. One of my key roles is to lead on the time to move on from congregated settings policy, and this piece of work, the webinar today, has come out of a lot of the work that we do around that policy, and just making sure that everybody's aware of how the different pieces, the different legislation, regulations, and pieces fit together. So I suppose in terms of just outlining how we came to wanting to do this piece of work this morning, in 2019 we did a review of the Register of Congregated Settings. So that's really the list of settings that we track. And what we found when we did that piece of work was that in some cases there's such a movement of people working within disabilities that they weren't always 100% familiar with the different pieces of legislation. So the UN Convention, the issue of public sector duty, understanding the UN Convention in relation to Article 19, and then also the actual devil of the detail that's in the congregated settings policy itself. So lots of people are very, very knowledgeable and understand this inside out, but other people, I think sometimes it's a case of the day job is so busy they don't get the time to really sit down and digest this. So what we'd recommended as part of that piece of work when we looked at the reviewing of the register was really to support people on the ground. What we probably needed to do was do some training, some awareness training around this. And at the time that we wrote it, we weren't in COVID, so the intention had been that we would try to do this through the residential placement committees, which are committees that sit within each CHO area, where all the service providers that provide residential supports come together. As it happened, I suppose COVID happened, and this presented us an opportunity to do this slightly differently, and actually to do this through this vehicle as an online event. And then hopefully that gives us a wider coverage, you know, that more people are able to join, because I think when you actually have sessions on a particular day, it's not always easy, but having the facility to record this means hopefully that we have a bigger coverage. So our intention today is to do this piece, this awareness piece, and make this widely available, and hopefully just, I suppose, build that understanding of how the different pieces of legislation and regulations tie together. So if we just move forward, Kathy. So I'm just going to cover the, before Meredith and Mark do their presentations, I'm just doing a really high level, quick overview of the time to move on policy. And as I said, the context of this was actually the Register of Settings. So it's about understanding just the criteria of what what the criteria of congregated setting is. So the report that was written in July, it was published in 2012. It was accepted in 2012, it was published in 2011. So the definition of a congregated setting is where 10 or more people share a single living unit, or where they're living in arrangements that are campus-based. It covered all residential services for people with intellectual, physical and sensory disabilities, adults and children. Okay, should I move forward? Hold on 2 seconds.
Yeah, you should see slide 5.
So the key recommendations in the report are that people would be supported to live ordinary lives in ordinary places. And I think that's a little bit of a tag that we have in terms of capturing the essence of what the congregated settings report is all about. It is about living full lives at the heart of the family, community and society. And I think that's really key to understanding that the policy isn't just about decanting and moving to a better house. It's about really changing people's lives, an absolute shift in people's lives to be part of the community and to have, to be connected. And that's something that, what we're seeing time and time again, is something that happens after the move. And with all the planning in the world and this fantastic planning going on within the services, so much that happens after the move is somewhat unexpected and can take time. And it is just that natural evolution about reconnecting and connecting with family and community, and just finding a role within society and a sense of purpose for individuals. It is about living in dispersed forms of housing in ordinary communities. So this is to ensure that we're not creating these kind of little disability housing estates which don't support inclusion and an individual person-centered care. It is about having access to mainstream services, and this comes down to the whole issue of equity and access, so that ensure people are accessing their GP, public health nursing services, OT physio, as is appropriate to their needs. So there might be specialist attached disability services, but where it's appropriate, people should be accessing mainstream services as much as possible. It is the whole issue of inclusion. And that people receive those supports they need to live independently and be part of their community. And I suppose independence and self-determination are absolutely key. So I think if we move forward, the next slide talks about the housing. Just to say, there are 31 recommendations in the report. They're very far-reaching, and they are very much involve a lot of the different departments. It's really not just health. It's not housing, it's not just health and the service providers, it is housing, it is social protection, it is employment. To give people a full and round life, all of the different parties need to be involved. In terms of the housing recommendations, there are a number that deal with housing, but specifically it's clear that when people are moving from congregated settings, they should be provided with dispersed housing in the community, where they may choose to live on their own, share with other people who do not have a disability, share with people that do, or live with their own family or in a long-term placement with another family. So that is more the home sharing host family option. It is about choice and it being the will and preference of the individual. And then clearly it says that where home sharing with other people with a disability is the option, it's recommended that it should be no more than 4 residents in total. So no more than 3, the person sharing with 3 other people with a disability. This is, I suppose, where sometimes this particular line and the first line of the definition of a congregated setting being no more than 10 gets confusing. So in terms of what we track as a congregated settings, it's settings that would have had at a point in time no more 10 or more individuals living together. But in terms of what we're recommending for services and for arrangements where people are moving and transitioning, that it should be no more than 4. It's fully recognised that we have a lot of community group homes that maybe have somewhere between 5 and 9. They don't currently get tracked as congregated settings if that's been the arrangement. It's not to say that that's ideal or acceptable. I suppose we aspire to no more than 4 people living together. And so any of the any of the transitions that we are working towards, that is always the benchmark that we would ask people to adhere to. And I think what's key to point out is that in terms of the Department of Housing circulars and the HSC policy, we won't fund arrangements that are for more than 4 people living together unless there is a incredibly strong case to explain why that might be the situation, as being in line with somebody's will and preference. There have been a few exceptions to that, where groups of people have lived together for a long time, and it's clearly demonstrated that it's their will and preference to continue to do that, but they are the absolute exception rather than the rule. And just to be clear on that as well, that where a setting would have had more than 10 people and would have been classed as a congregated setting and the numbers fall, once people are still living in the same environment, it's still classed as a congregated setting. So it's not a case that just because the numbers drop, it's taken off the list. If you imagine a large institution, we would have institutions where there would be upwards of 100 people living in large, the old sort of stone grey buildings. Just because the numbers fall, it doesn't simply come off the list once it goes below 10. Those people are still living in inappropriate accommodation. So it is a congregated setting until it closes. Okay. So that's, I suppose, a very quick, and I appreciate a very quick overview, but it's just to set the context of how we came about. This was the understanding around the criteria for what's counted as a congregated setting. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Meredith Raleigh, who's going to cover the United Conventions of the Rights of People with Disabilities, UN CRPD as we call it, and public sector duty. Thank you, Meredith.
All right, thanks, Suzanne. Let me just see if... All right, so I'm going to try to give you a very quick introduction to the UN CRPD, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, as well as the public sector duty and how they relate to each other. So we'll start with the UN CRPD. So the UN CRPD, it's a human rights treaty from the United Nations. The UN has produced 7 of these treaties. They've all been ratified by Ireland. So the UN CRPD joins other human rights treaties that address the rights of marginalized groups such as women, children, and racial and ethnic minorities. Ireland ratified the UN CRPD in the spring of 2018. So ratification of the treaty just means that Ireland has accepted the responsibility of implementing the UN CRPD. So of changing Ireland's laws, policies, practices to line up with those found in the UN CRPD. So implementation of the UN CRPD is overseen both internationally and nationally. On the international level, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities oversees Ireland's implementation. And it does that. Ireland has to report to the United Nations every 5 years to let it know what progress it has made and to answer any questions the international community might have about that progress. Nationally, it's overseen by the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, IREC. IREC oversees all the human rights treaties. It's one of their functions. For the UN CRPD, they've set up a special advisory committee to oversee and assist in the monitoring process. This committee is made up by its own regulations as over half people with disabilities. So the next question is, what is the public sector duty? So the public sector duty is a national statutory duty in Ireland. It's found in Section 42 of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission Act 2014. So when the old Human Rights Commission and the Equality Authority were merged, that was when the public sector duty was brought in. So it requires all public bodies to take specific actions to eliminate discrimination, promote equality, and protect human rights. This covers all government bodies. It covers all departments, the HSC, local authorities, ETBs. All of them are bound by this duty. So it's a statutory responsibility, and so there is a legal obligation to comply with this duty. So as far as how these relate to each other, the UN CRPD is obviously a human rights document, and the public sector duty requires an understanding of human rights.
It's a very serious breach of resident confidentiality, isn't it?
Can everybody please go on mute? There's background noise there. Thank you.
Sorry about that. So the basic idea is that the UN CRPD can be a useful document for finding actions to take under the public sector duty, as well as making sure that the public sector duty is headed in the right direction. If the public sector duty is being used to implement more and more of the UN CRPD, then you're doing things the right way as far as disability goes. Disability is particularly important for the HSC, obviously, given your responsibilities, and it's particularly important for time to move on, given that many of the ideas behind time to move on are found in the UN CRPD, and the UN CRPD can be a really useful yardstick for how you're fulfilling the rights of people with disabilities around independent living. Apologies for leaning in, the controls are just hard to see. This is just from the most recent IREC annual report. And just to give you some idea of how much discrimination people with disabilities face on a daily basis. So the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission maintain an information line where people can contact them with human rights queries. And this you can see in 2019, they received just over 2,000 queries. And what you can see here is disability is a very common grounds for a query. Of queries around the Equal Status Act, 29% were about disability. Of those around the Employment Equality Act, 36% were about disability. And of those around the Intoxicating Liquor Act, which is around discrimination in pubs and hotels mostly, 24% were around disability. This is just a reminder of how much work there is still to be done in Ireland as far as equality for people with disabilities. So how does all this apply to the HSC, to the time to move on process? Now, obviously, the HSC is a public body and therefore required to take action under the public sector duty. Concerns around inequality that encompass health, disability, independent living, congregated settings, these are all of particular importance given the work that you're doing. So the public sector duty requires taking action in 4 different areas: policy making, service delivery, budgeting and procurement, and employment and HR must all be taken into account when looking at public sector duties, when looking at your public sector actions. So procurement's obviously particularly important, and service delivery in the realm of time to move on. Service delivery and procurement might be are of particular importance. There's also around the public sector duty always a duty to consult. So the idea of the public sector duty is that it's a very transparent process. The actions that you take should be arrived at very transparently, and they should be easy for someone to find so somebody going to their website or calling in to be able to know what actions are being taken, what these actions mean, what progress has been made on them. All this meant to be very transparent, and that includes consulting with staff, with users, to make sure that you've really thought about where the gaps are, where progress needs to be made. So yeah, this can include, and these consultations must be taken into account when preparing your actions. So as far as how to apply the UN CRPD to public sector duty, I'm trying to go through parts of a few articles to give you an idea of what you can find in the UN CRPD and how it can be useful to your own actions. So this is Article 19 of the UN CRPD. It's living independently and being included in the community. Obviously, in the context of time to move on, it's an extremely important right. So yeah, the equal right to live in the community with choices equal to others, including the opportunity to choose your place of residence, where and with whom you live on an equal basis with others, and are not obligated to live in any particular living arrangement. So that's basically the same way that anyone else might choose. I want to live in a town or a village or a city or on a farm. I want to live with my friends, my family, alone. All of those choices should be equally available to people with disabilities. People with disabilities should have access to whatever services they need in order to facilitate this kind of community living, including personal assistance and other in-home and community services. And all mainstream community services must be both open to and welcoming of people with disabilities, so that people with disabilities can avail of any mainstream supports that are available in the community. So possible actions around that include gathering data so that you know the preferred living situations of people with disabilities and therefore can ensure that there's accessible housing in those locations and accessible services. Finding out what supports would be needed to allow people with disabilities to enter into their preferred living situations, and working with mainstream services to ensure they're disability friendly. So Article 12 is equal recognition before the law. It also gets called legal capacity. This is basically the right to be seen as a person and to make your own legal decisions. So to make decisions about where you live, who you date, who you marry, just basic decisions that generally get taken for granted and are often, in many cases, denied to people with disabilities. So state parties shall ensure that people with disabilities can make these decisions and ensure that they're supported. A lot of that would be around the Assisted Decision Making Act that will be commenced hopefully shortly. So possible actions around Article 12, ensuring people with disabilities can make significant choices. Ensuring staff around the HSC are aware of the importance of supporting people to make decisions and allowing them to make their own decisions, and ensuring people interacting with the HSC have access to support to make their own decisions. So Article 22, respect for privacy. No people with disabilities, regardless of place of living or place of residence or living arrangement, shall have their privacy interfered with. This includes your family, your home, your correspondence, or any private property the person may own. State parties should protect the privacy of as well as physical objects, the privacy of information for people with disabilities in the same way they do for everyone else. So the same GDPR requirements should apply to people with disabilities as they do to anyone else in the country. So possible actions around all that, ensuring that GDPR requirements are applied to the data of people with disabilities and allowing them to control and make choices about how their data is collected and how it's stored in the same way you would any other person. And ensuring that the HSC and HSC funded facilities are all aware of the importance of the right to privacy and make sure they respect it in their own actions. So yeah, we do understand that, especially in residential centers and so on, there can be a bit of a conflict between the UN CRPD and current health and safety standards. The UN CRPD gives much more scope for people to take their own risk, which is not always respected by our current laws. But HICWA is also bound by public sector duty and has been doing their own human rights work. So we're hoping that those conflicts sort of resolve themselves as the public sector duty pushes everyone towards a more rights-based view of disability. All right, and from there, I believe I'm handing over to Mark. So thank you for your time, and I hope this was helpful.
Thank you very much, Meredith. Margaret, if you want, you can unmute as well at the moment. And we will here. Okay, I suppose, look, this the presentation is based on a piece of research Inclusion Ireland did throughout 2018 and 19, and we would have launched it just over a year ago, and it's called 19 Stories of Social Inclusion in Ireland, Stories of Belonging, Contributing and Connecting. And the reason it's called 19 Stories is it gives a nod to Article 19 of the UN Convention that Meredith was just speaking about. So I suppose, look, historically, the model of support for people with intellectual disabilities in Ireland is one of wraparound care. This is where a person would live and access all of their services from the same provider, and quite often this was done in a campus setting. In recent years, though, there's been a shift in thinking informed by international human rights treaties and international and national evidence of negative impacts of this type of service provision on the inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities in everyday society. People with disabilities have quite often been central to this shift in thinking, for example, the independent living movement. So look, if we just look at the policy landscape, policy in Ireland, for the most part, it aims to provide personalised services that's very much in line with the UN Convention and Article 19. These policies would include the one we're speaking about today, time to move on from congregated settings, a strategy for community inclusion, new directions. A key feature of new directions is individualised, outcome-focused supports that allow adults to live a life of their choosing in accordance with their own wishes, their needs and their aspirations. We also have a very comprehensive national disability inclusion strategy, and there are many others, including, for example, the comprehensive employment strategy. We've got a personal budgets demonstration project, etc., etc. I suppose that really serves to tell us that we're operating in a very rich policy environment at the moment. However, as we all know from working in direct services or for ourselves in the advocacy arena, there can quite often be a significant gap between policy and implementation for a whole myriad of reasons. So, just recapping on what Margaret was saying, many of the articles contained are relevant to social inclusion. However, Article 19, which recognises the right of all persons with disabilities to live independently and be included in the community, is absolutely crucial. And I'm just going to hand over to my co-presenter Margaret for a few slides.
Our understanding of social inclusion is in line with the UN General Comment on Article 19. The right to be included in the community relates to the principle of full and inclusion and participation in society. It includes living a full social life and having access to all services offered to the public and to support services offered to persons with disabilities to enable them to be fully included and participate in all spheres of social life. These services can, among others, relate to housing, transport, shopping, education, employment, recreational activities, and all other facilities and services offered to the public, including social media. To do our research, we recruited a diverse group of people through a sampling strategy, carried out face-to-face interviews with 19 participants. Some had supporters present at their request. Interviews were recorded and transcribed. A thematic examination was carried out. The next slide is a video of about 2 minutes that gives an overview of the research.
If you can bear with me 1 second, I think I forgot to press a little button at the start, so just bear with me 2 seconds.
A person like me or anybody else, the most important thing is who you want to be. All you have to do is just get out there.
I'm taking a big interest in music and then also the art as well.
I like being involved with people, like meeting different people. It's great to be out and about.
I think of his love of friends and people and his colleagues, and he just loves being around people.
It's a serious work. I work in the work, I feel happy, smart, and if it hard things.
He comes in just like everybody else. Sits down and he knows every face. And they all know him and they all say, "Hello, John, how are you?"
We're no different from anybody else. We should be treated equal.
We should be treated as everyone else. We're special needs, yes, but it doesn't mean we're not human. We are human, so we do deserve the respect that other people get.
My motto is you have to get up every morning with a smile on your face.
Oh, I think it's very important that I'm not excluded because of who I am and where I came from. They all respect me for who I am, and that's the way I love it. And I respect them for respecting me.
We had a diverse team working on the research, design, interviews, and examining the results. The team included academics, people with lived experience of intellectual disability and inclusion in Ireland. The data was collected by interviewing people with intellectual disabilities and not services and supporters. Some of the participants did not communicate verbally, so had support from a supporter to tell their story. We share the stories in an accessible way via videos, written stories, and easy read report. For the research, we recruited 19 people who are a diverse group of participants, 10 men and 9 women aged between 19 and 68 years. Participants were from farms, villages, towns, and cities in Ireland. Participants had a wide range of life experience, interests, and ambitions, just as in the wider population. All participants had an intellectual disability, 17 had additional disability. Participants had a wide range of support needs. 12 participants were in mainstream work. 10 participants were living in independent settings. 8 participants were taking part in education in mainstream settings. 3 of them in mainstream accredited education and 5 in courses for people with disabilities. 9 participants were taking part in mainstream community activities, such as knitting groups, choirs, and bands or tidy town groups. Most participants maintain self-directed relationships and friendships. I am now going to hand you back over to Mark.
Thank you, Margaret. So I suppose what the research did show to us was, I suppose, a number of things: the value of social inclusion, what made social inclusion happen, and what good support looks like. I'm just going to delve into each of those just in a little bit more detail. You can see on the slide there some of the quotes that people said about the value of social inclusion, but being involved in mainstream activities gave participants a sense of belonging and contributing. Especially some of the working participants particularly expressed similar sentiments to those expressed by the general working population, i.e. a sense of being valued and participating. They also felt valued, appreciated. I couldn't be happier because I'm independent. The value placed autonomy or choice and control in people's lives came across very in the research. For example, one participant said, "For us, we can do our own thing and I'm my own boss. I can make the decisions." One very interesting thing to come up was that once social inclusion happened, it created opportunities for further social inclusion. For example, one person was able to join a Tidy Towns group and interact with their community in that manner because they were now living in a regular community setting. And other participants pointed out how they had made friends within their communities or their jobs that they were accessing once they were living in a community setting. During the interviews themselves, and again, there's more quotes there on what made disability inclusion happen, but during the interviews themselves, there was very little talk of disability. The starting point for planning a socially included life was, you know, it involved very direct and purposeful work by the service and the supporters, and it was about planning around the person's individual interests. What were their strengths? What resources did they have? It was a focus on the unique individual rather than the disability. Participants reported that planning for work, job coaches and other supporters worked with them to identify personal interests and experiences that may lead to a good match in relation to work. Examples included matching the experience of a farm-based childhood to an outdoor job working in landscape. And another was somebody who had a really gregarious nature and love of the banter, which led to a receptionist job. Both participants identified the importance of the process in discovering around their needs. The key to unlocking possible routes for engaging in the community for some people who had communication challenges was to seek information from family members around unique childhood experiences and current interests. This, along with spending time with the participant themselves, provided clues to the unique individual and how they may participate in their community. I think we've got another short video coming up here, indeed, and this is John's story.
Stories of social inclusion. John's story. John is in his 50s. At 13, John went to live in a psychiatric hospital. 7 years ago, he moved out to a home of his own for the first time in the countryside. He works, volunteers and socialises in his local village and the surrounding area.
This is John, and I work with John down here in Longford. John is very friendly, he loves company, and he loves the simple life. Although at times when I say that he loves company and attention and the whole lot, he does like his private time, as we all do, but the simple life, John loves the simple life. John really loves animals. Animals would be a big thing to him. You'll always notice John takes notice of animals. He would go and he would work with Charlie, alongside Charlie on the farm, working with animals. Yeah, on the farm, isn't it? And he would feed cattle or whatever. But then also, when this work is over, it's a big thing for John to come in and sit at the family table with Charlie and his wife and kids. He's embracing it himself. You can see that he is embracing this, and it's given him, I suppose, a sense of belonging. He loves getting out, socialising. When somebody speaks to him, you know, you can see John has grown, you know, in stature. He's noticed. So I mean, that makes him, what we see, we can see that he's happy inside. Is that right, John? Yeah, John is supported into making sure John is involved in the local community and recognised in the local community. So be that in volunteering work, as in working in graveyards, making benches, etc., etc. It's all about making connections.
We're great friends with John. John has been, he's a good while really and truly coming in now. He knows us all, he knows us very well, and he knows the customers that come into the bar, and they befriend him and he befriends them, and he's always very much at ease. He comes in just like everybody else, sits down, and himself and Killian there and have a chat, and he knows every face, and they all know him, and they all say, "Hello John, how are you?" He'll nod back at them, you know. Oh, we like John. We have a great time for John.
We'd go into the pub and everybody would turn, as you know, in a local pub or whatever, they would turn their heads and they would look, and it's always, "How are you, John?" You know, I'm forgotten, I'm just burst to the side, but John, it's always, "How are you, John? How are you today?" John may not answer them, but John, again, as I said, you can see him grow. He's been spoken to, he's been recognised, and that's something that it's very important to John. Like, you know, people might overlook that fact, but it's actually quite important to him. To show people on the outside looking in that John is able to bring community, and that John is, worth as much as anybody else and what he can bring, and then that they can respect that and look and say, well, no, he is a valued member of our community.
I suppose just moving on to what good support looked like, participants' understanding of social inclusion were broad and incorporated various elements associated with inclusion in the community, such as inclusive work, education, community, social activity, living in a home of your own. So there's much more to it than just the presence of being there. But they also included more difficult to quantify elements such as relationships with others, a sense of belonging and valued, of contributing, and of exercising their own autonomy. I think of it, yeah, it's okay. So I suppose just rounding up on what it means for policy and practice. As you can see, our Article 19, while it is concerned with living in the community and just with our own research, and I should hasten to say there are a host of other videos and research on this, all conducted in Ireland. There's some particularly good ones on the HSE's Time to Move On page from places like St. Raphael's and Drumcar, where really good work has been done. And you can see that there's so much more feeds into Article 19. If we look at capacity and choice, the emphasis placed on exercise and choice and control by participants underlines the importance of providing structures and supports for people with intellectual disabilities to make their own decisions. Currently, many people with intellectual disabilities don't have this opportunity to make choices for themselves and to have, and there's no legal entitlement at present to make decisions or for support to make decisions, pardon me. Participants also noted the importance of looking at their interests, strengths and resources of unique individuals. And, as I was saying already, never underestimate the relationship between the supporter and the person themselves. And there's that whole piece of, moving from the traditional of caring towards supporting people around advocacy, around building social skills, community connecting, all of those good things. And then mainstream services and support, to access these where possible. The research has shown that the more time people spent in the community accessing mainstream services and activities, the more likely they were to feel included. And joining groups and making connections, it really provides for the important supports to people at these challenging times in their lives. So I'm just going to play one last short video, and then I'm going to hand over to Margaret for a conclusion.
Stories of social inclusion. Margaret's story. Margaret, aged 68, has her own home for the first time in her life. Since Margaret was a very small child, she lived in institutions and group homes. Over her life, she has built a large and strong network of friends and supporters.
My name is Margaret Gahan. I'm 68 now, and it's the first home I had, and now I'm going to be 69 in January. Imagine I'm living in a lovely complex, a house of my own. Imagine. I can't believe I have a house of my own. We started preparing to live out here and things like that. We did a course for the way we live and shopping and things like that, and we progressed every day. I can do a lot. Didn't think people credit me to do. That's the truth. I feel now that I'm my own person. I have no one looking over my shoulders, so that's the reason why I'm happy living out. I can come and go when I feel like it. Stay in bed all day if I want to. I don't either. Watch whatever sports I want to, because I like sports. I love soccer and I love rugby and I love Gaelic. I can cook whenever I feel like it, and I know how to cook. I'm a brilliant cooker, even though I say so myself, but I am. I do ironing, and it keeps me out of the house, keeps me from getting bored, and I do a lot of, walking. I like walking, and I keep fit walking. The communities, people are absolutely lovely. We have singing classes, and we have great crack. I love it. Every third or fourth week I'll host it, and I enjoy that. I love being the host of looking after people and giving them coffees and teas and being merry and everything like that. I'm a very merry person. I'm to be ashamed of who I am, because I love who I am. I'm very happy myself, and the village crowds have a meeting every Wednesday, so everybody gets together. We have a cup of tea and a cup of coffee. This is a small little complex, and it's 48 houses. They're very nice people around here. I have no regrets coming here at all. I absolutely love it. I like company. I like people to be always nice to me, and I'd be nice to them. Everything is lovely now and rosy here. I swear to God it is. I wouldn't make it up. It's really, really all very important that I'm not excluded because of who I am and where I came from. They all respect me for who I am, and that's the way I love it. And I respect them for respecting me.
Now, I think that's just over to you, Margaret.
When doing the research, we came up with some recommendations for policy and practice to make sure more people have a chance to in leading community-included lives. A plan to support people with relationships, self-advocacy, and other types of advocacy should be included in the National Disability Inclusion Strategy 2017 to 2021. Decision-making support and resources from the Decision Support Service, the right to make or have the right support to make your own decisions. It is very important. This removes a barrier. Supporters for self-advocacy and leadership needed to help people to develop a vision of what is possible in life and realize their dreams. Person-centered support that focus on the strengths and interests of the person themselves, or in some cases on historical interests that are revisited. Accessible housing, Department of Housing and Department of Health to work together. Use public sector equality and human rights duty to address barriers to access services. We want to thank again the men and women who shared the stories with us and leave you with some of their words. I couldn't be happier because I am independent. It's all about the match with support. The Nissan Club organized an outing for me when my mother died. The kitchen table had a takeout the night you moved. With all the work done, we were too tired to cook. All the family were there. I couldn't do that if I was in the hostel. I had to have staff everywhere I go. I think it's very important that people with intellectual disability or disabilities in general encourage each other to make the move. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
And I think is it hand back to yourself, Suzanne?
Thank you, Mark and Margaret. Thank you very much. And the videos were great. They really added, I suppose, a great richness to the presentation. I think one of the things that's really important about the piece was really showing how it's the time and the intentional work that really makes a better life, a socially included life for people. When we look at the time to move on policy, when we started the piece of work, and even when we started the webinar today, we focused on the numbers in terms of what defines a congregated setting as being more than 10, and what a new service should look like in terms of being no more than 4. But they really are numbers and benchmarks, and it's about the life and the will and preference of the person and how we support that piece. And so the message was very clear today in terms of looking at the circle of support for somebody, looking at their network, the meaningful relationships, and focusing on what the life that somebody wants, looking at their family, their role, the importance of work, the importance of social connections, and just the whole richness of life. There are wonderful examples, as you said, in terms of the videos that we have on the web page. There's videos on the Genio website. I'm sure they won't mind me saying that. There's videos on the Time to Move On website. The link is there. That's just gone up on the final slide. So it's, if you type in even www.hse.ie time to move on / and that will take you to the site. There are lots of examples, and all the time the services are improving in relation to that, and the experience that I suppose the experience and how that's building across services. And I think one of the things that we find we do, not this year with COVID, but we do a fair amount of site visits, and we meet with the teams and we visit people before and after their moves. Sometimes they're surprised themselves at the journey they've gone on. So it is about sharing this, sharing the experience. One of the examples you gave there, Mark, was around, I suppose, connecting with the family and discussing maybe what somebody had experienced in their youth and reconnecting with those pieces. And there were lots of examples of pieces like that, where somebody's out and about in the community and they meet people that maybe they knew when they were younger, and all of a sudden a kind of a connection reforms and starts again. So there's lots of really positive pieces to that, and it's not just about the moving house. I suppose it is so much more than that, which is what we were really trying to capture today, that it's not necessarily about the numbers. The numbers are important, it's a starting point and it's a benchmark, but for the individual there is so much more to it than that. So Kathy, is there anything that we needed to cover? Is there any particular queries?
There's no queries presenting on the chat at the moment, unless anybody would like to raise their hand.
Okay.
Or any of the speakers, whether it's from legislation or lived experience or your own policy perspective.
We've run about to time. We're about 1 minute and 8. We were aiming between an hour and an hour and 15, so we've done pretty well to time. Look, if we will circulate out the link and the presentations via the email that we sent the original listing out to. If people don't get that, if they just want to contact myself or Kathy, so myself, it's suzanne.r.maloney@hse.ie, and be very happy to share that. We'll put the presentations up on our webpage afterwards, which I said is the Time to Move On webpage. And if there are any queries after the fact, please come back to me. And I think we'll finish there. Thank you very much for attending this morning.
Thank you.